Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Thank you so much for joining me. Okay, we're picking up our discussion of Succot, the Feast of Harvest, as we continue our study of the feast days of Israel. Now, the Feast of Harvest was the feast of our joy, as the Jews referred to it. It was one of the most joyous times of the year because they had gathered in the harvest. Now they're praising Yahweh, they're giving thanks to Him, they're celebrating living in His presence as best they could under Torah. It was just an amazing time of year. You can get just that much of a flavor of it when you look at John chapter 6 and 7. Because that is couched in the time of Sukkot and recounts the Exodus in John chapter 6 about the manna in the wilderness, the second Exodus, and all the. It's so rich. It's absolutely incredibly rich. Well, on Monday I shared with you that in Matthew chapter 13, and we're taking kind of a circuitous route back to Matthew chapter 13, but I really wanted to share with you how this end of the age concept linked with Sukkot has nothing to do with the end of time and the harvest of the literal physical creation. Rather, it was to be the harvest of the old covenant age, to bring in the new covenant age, which is unending and everlasting. Okay, so we went to Isaiah chapter 27, part of the little apocalypse. I pointed out to you how Yahweh planted Israel in the dirt, in the graves, in the earth. The book of Hosea, Isaiah 27. He did that by sending her into captivity. Now, the individuals are biologically still alive, but they're corporately dead because they're alienated from God. That was their death. Okay? But Yahweh said, looking beyond the immediate context of the Assyrian captivity, the immediate context of the siege of Jerusalem, to a time in which Jerusalem would be destroyed and the altar would be destroyed. Now, some people try to make this strictly, they try to extrapolate to the time of the Babylonian captivity. Well, yes, the Babylonian captivity basically took care of literal idolatry. But guess what? This is talking about the time of the restoration of Israel, her ultimate harvest. And let me read again for you Isaiah chapter 27, verse 12 and 13. It will come about in that day. Now remember, in that day is the day of their captivity, encompassing their captivity, that the Lord will start His threshing. Here's the harvest, ladies and gentlemen. From the flowing streams of the Euphrates to the brook of Egypt, and you shall be gathered up one by one, O sons of Israel. It shall come about also in that day that a great trumpet will be blown, and those who are perishing, see, they're dead, in the land of Assyria, who were scattered in the land of Egypt, will come and worship the Lord in the holy mountain at Jerusalem. See, Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, but Jerusalem's going to be restored. That's what's involved here. As I said yesterday, as N.T. Wright likes to say of passages like this, it is pregnant with meaning. I mean, it's just chock full of eschatological themes. Point number one, harvest. The Lord will begin His threshing. Point number two, it's the episunagoge, the end times gathering, the end time harvest. Okay? And when would this take place? Oh, when the altars turn to chalk stone etc., etc. But notice it would be at the sounding of the great trumpet. So the episunagoge harvest would be at the sounding of the great trumpet to gather the dead. Those who are not biologically dead, but those who are alienated from God through sin. Okay. In Matthew chapter 24, now remember, we're talking about the end of the age. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus predicted the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. The apostles respond by saying, "Tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" Now look, folks, I've said this many, many times. One of the most fundamental theological errors in all of Christianity, is the belief that when Jesus predicted the fall of Jerusalem and the temple, the apostles mistakenly, ignorantly, confusedly linked the destruction of that temple with the end of the Christian age and the end of time. Look, I believed that for years. I taught that for years. Over and over and over, I taught that the apostles were confused. Well, about 2 years ago, I wrote a book, Watching for the Parousia, Were Jesus' Apostles Confused? Because as I just stated, it is assumed without merit, without evidence, that the apostles confusedly linked the destruction of the temple and the suntelia to aeoniou, the end of the age of Matthew 13, the end of the age harvest with Matthew 13. You know, it's fascinating to me when I wrote that book, Kenneth Gentry, who basically refuses otherwise to even acknowledge that I exist, even though I know that he has many of my books. And what he does in his writings, he will give about a half of a sentence that is a quotation mark. He won't give quotation marks, but it's an exact quote from or a claim from one of my books and just take a side swipe at it. He never gives editorial or journalistic accreditation. But he did write a 4-piece article addressing my claim that his claim that the apostles were confused. And I said, and I taught, and I teach, and I wrote the book, Watching for the Parousia, Were Jesus' Apostles Confused? And in that book, I say, no, the apostles are not the ones that are confused. It's people like Kenneth Gentry and all futurists, even men like Thomas Ice, dispensationalist, Kim Riddlebarger, on and on. All of these men, good men, assume without merit, assume without evidence that the apostles were confused. Do you know how Kenneth Gentry seeks to establish, here's how we know that the apostles were confused? Oh, well, they were confused on other occasions. Now, folks, you want to talk about a good bit of bad logic, argumentum ad desperatum? Do you mean to tell me that because Jesus said the Son of Man will go up to Jerusalem, they'll be crucified and slain, but be raised from the dead the third day, and the apostles did not understand that, Matthew 16, Matthew 17, etc., that because they were confused about Jesus' predictions of his own resurrection, that proves they were confused about Jesus' statement concerning the end of the age or concerning the destruction of Jerusalem? Where's the connection there? Where's the logical connection there? Well, there is none. Listen, folks, when I was in school a long time ago, Okay, the teacher was teaching algebra. Maybe some of you out there can relate to me. Algebra was absolutely worse than Greek to me. I had to retake the course. The teacher passed me, but yeah, well, I had to take it again to even have a smattering of understanding. Over and over and over and over in class. And he was a good teacher, by the way. I would say, I do not understand. Now, when you would get me in a class on history, bingo. But you see, Kenneth Gentry's argument of saying Jesus' apostles did not understand his teaching about his resurrection, therefore they could not have understood his teaching about the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the age. That's like saying, well, because Preston didn't understand algebra, he couldn't understand history. Sorry, non sequitur. And I'm running out of time here. Here's the point. Jesus predicted the destruction of Jerusalem. The apostles did link that, no question about it, to the destruction of Jerusalem. Jesus answered their questions about what shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age by giving them some signs. This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to the nations. Then comes the end. And he uses the Greek word telos. And suntelia to aionion is not the same word, but it's associated with it. Soon, together, joined, teleos, consummation or end. So it's commonly translated as consummation of the age. You know, the end of the age. So Jesus gave a sign of the end of the age, completion of the world mission. That happened in the first century, according to Paul. Okay. Then Jesus gave the abomination of desolation. And then Jesus said, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will be turned to blood, the stars of heaven will fall from the sky, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Then they will see the sign of the Son of Man who is in heaven, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven in power and great glory. And the Son of Man, now watch this, catch the power of this, the Son of Man will send forth his angels. This is Matthew chapter 13, 39 and following. The Son of Man will send forth his angels with the sound of the great trumpet. I have not found, ladies and gentlemen, maybe there is someone out there, I have not found to this day, if you find it, let me know. I haven't found to this day a commentator who, in commenting on the relationship between Jesus and the Old Testament, ever said, now, okay, Isaiah 27:13, sounding the great trumpet, Matthew chapter 24:31, sounding the great trumpet, but they're different. Nope, haven't found that. In commentary after commentary after commentary, men such as G.K. Beale, who absolutely loves to say, okay, in this passage, Jesus or his apostles are quoting from this passage. G.K. Beale says, yeah, Matthew chapter 27:13. That's drawing directly on Isaiah 27:13. And he's right. The Jewish rabbis said that Isaiah 27:12 and 13 is the end time harvest at the end of the age when Israel would be gathered back to Yahweh. By the way, just real quickly, Thomas Ice said, one of the flaws with preterism is that all that it sees is judgment and destruction of Jerusalem, when in reality, the parousia is the time of the salvation of Israel. Well, I've never made the argument that AD 70 was strictly about judgment. Never made that argument. Have I focused on that as judgment? Sure. But I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we have to see, and I developed this in my book, Elijah Has Already Come, A Solution to Romans 11, 25 to 27, and in another book that I'll share with you in a moment. I've always taught that biblically the time of Israel's judgment is the time of Israel's salvation and the ushering in of the glorious new covenant, the new covenant age. So in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus is answering the apostles' question about the end of the age. That end of the age would be at the dissolution of Jerusalem and the temple. But in that dissolution and destruction and judgment, notice now, Jesus said, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world. Oh, wait a minute. Jesus was referring to the message of the coming destruction of the temple and city as the good news, euangelion, the gospel. Folks, how could Jesus call, I wrote a book on this, how could Jesus call the message of Jerusalem's imminent demise and destruction good news? I wrote a book entitled The Gospel of Destruction. The good news of destruction. How could that be? It is because, to reiterate, the end of the old was the full arrival of the new. And the new, which outshone the old in glory, so much and so far that they can't even be compared in glory, according to 2 Corinthians chapter 3. So do you see this? So here's the bad news. Jerusalem and the temple will be destroyed. Here's the good news. Israel will be gathered. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they shall gather together episunagoge. That's Isaiah 27:12. At that time, the Lord's threshing will begin in Egypt and Assyria and blah, blah, blah. And it will gather those who are perishing. They're dead. And in that day, the Lord shall sound the great trumpet and gather those who are gathering, those who are perishing. Episunagoge, harvest, trumpet. Matthew chapter 24. The end of the age. The gathering, episunagoge. The sounding of the great trumpet. Again, for the harvest gathering. When would that take place? Matthew 24:34. Verily I say unto you, which is Jesus' strongest way of asserting the truthfulness of it, this generation will by no means pass away until all of these things are fulfilled. Folks, here's the good news. Bad news, Jerusalem and the temple are going to fall. There's going to be horrific suffering. That's the bad news. The good news is the glorious kingdom, the salvation of Israel. The harvest is going to take place at that time. And again, nothing could be better news than the establishment of the everlasting kingdom. That's the establishment of everlasting righteousness. Isaiah 46:13. Now look, I promise you a really, really, really good book special for here in December. These two books are directly related with what I'm sharing with you right now about the harvest and the end of the age. My book, Temple to Telos, that is, Jesus said that in the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, all things written would be fulfilled. Luke chapter 21 and verse 22. And as I point out in this book, that was to be at the time of the fulfillment of Succot. And some people have jumped all over that and say, well, you've got a couple of weeks there, of temporality, disjunction. Doesn't matter. I'm sorry. Jesus posited the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple as the time for the fulfillment of all things written. All things written in the Old Testament. The Old Testament contained the feast days. It contained the prophecy of the end of the age. It contained the prophecy of the sounding of the great trumpet to gather the synagogue. So here is Jesus in Matthew chapter 24, predicting the end time fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 27. That's the end time harvest. And it was going to happen in his generation at the sounding of the great trumpet for the destruction of Jerusalem, the sounding of the great trumpet for the gathering of the elect. I'm out of time. Now, as I mentioned, I've written these two books. If you ordered these two books separately, paid shipping on them separately, it cost you $47. Okay? For the month of December 2024, U.S. orders only, total delivered price $30. Do yourself a favor, get yourself a great Christmas present. These are the days in which all things must be fulfilled, based on Luke 21:22, and Temple to Telos, based on Luke 21 and verse 22. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, click the banner right up at the very top, order the two books, save yourselves almost $20, get a tremendous resource for understanding Sukkot and harvest at the end of the age. Hey, thanks for joining me. Be sure to join Mike Sullivan and me tonight on Christian Apologetics, and then on Friday, I'll continue my review and response to Brian Hodge and his book, Problems with Preterism. I'll see you there.